The Book Program. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now from the States is Gerald Weaver. He was once one of the United States' top political lobbyists and most sought-after campaign manager on Capitol Hill. In his lifetime, he's been instrumental in presidential campaigns, influenced federal legislation, and counted some of the world's most powerful politicians as close friends and allies. Gerald's time on Capitol Hill ended abruptly when he was caught up in the Congressional Post Office scandal, accused of obstructing justice and conspiracy to distribute cocaine. Though he maintains he's innocent of the charges brought against him, Gerald entered a plea deal to reduce his sentence. Convicted and incarcerated, it was whilst in jail that Gerald gained the inspiration for Gospel Prism, which is his debut novel out now. Welcome to the book show, Gerald.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello.
Hi, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us. So lots to talk about here. I'm not exactly sure where to start. Before we talk about your book, I want to ask you about your career, because everything was going so well, wasn't it?
Yes, actually, I was often the youngest person at every stage of my career. I came to Washington as an intern, and I was very quickly hired as a staff person, and I taught myself how to run a campaign, and I ran one successfully in a very high-profile race against a congressman who had changed parties, so the Democratic leadership was very interested in his defeat. And I was, on the front page of the Washington Post, and when we won, I was the youngest chief of staff in the U.S. House of Representatives. Did that for 3 or 4 years and went to work as a lawyer lobbyist at a law firm, set up my own firm, and in many cases there I was the youngest person in the room as well. So I'd been doing that for 13 years when it all sort of fell apart.
And how did it fall apart? I mean, was it just one day suddenly it happened?
Well, it seemed like that, although in a Kafkaesque fashion it actually went for several months, but the House Post Office scandal was a thing where several members of Congress had been doing this horrible bit of petty thievery. They'd been buying stamps with their federal accounts and then turning around and selling them for cash. I didn't know any of that, but I knew one of the congressmen who allegedly had done it, and I also knew the House Postmaster fairly well. So the assistant U.S. attorney came to me and said, "We need you to tell us about these people on the Hill." And I said, "Well, there's no way I'm going to do that." And he said, "Looked at me and he said, well, we can ruin your life. I went to Harvard Law School with guys who went to Yale with you, and I know, what kind of life you've had." And I thought on that, and I thought, no, there's nothing I can do. I'd only ever been a recreational drug user, and I'd stopped that years before. But, part of that sort of Kafkaesque thing was that he rounded up 6 of my friends, gave them all immunity, called us a conspiracy, and then sort of charged me for what they had done after I had stopped using. So it was a strange thing. And then the other thing that happened was they were very interested in making the investigation move forward quickly, but it was not doing that because people on the Hill have resources and are crafty, and it was dragging on. So they really, when I sat down and made the deal, they insisted on an obstruction of justice charge. There was absolutely no basis for that. But it was a crazy time.
Did you feel completely out of control? Did you feel that there were all these powers above you and you just had to go along with it all?
That only came on gradually and toward the end, because there was this long concatenation of circumstances that led to the thing happening. And one of them was that the mandatory minimum laws would have required the judge to sentence me to 7 years, and this is all fairly recent. Those have been passed under Reagan, and my understanding of the law, I'm a lawyer, my father was a lawyer, was that if you went to trial and lost, the judge would sentence you, and I had figured in my case he would look and say, well, this is a long time ago, these are all these other people, and even had I lost, he probably would have given me a very small sentence. And also, it would have been worth fighting, but the mandatory minimum laws changed all that. So rather than risk 7 years, I bargained for 2. And I guess one of the links in that strange chain was my lawyer was engaged in a conflict of interest. And when the judge discovered that, she released me after 16 months.
Wow. And how about all these people that you became friends with, that you were working with on Capitol Hill? Did they all disappear when this happened?
It's an interesting question, actually, Hannah, because you find out who's stalwart and who's not. And some people came forward, and it wasn't really based on what you might expect. You would expect that the people who were close to you would stand up, and the ones who didn't know you so well wouldn't. But actually, I found out that who stood up and who was with me the whole time was more a matter of character than it was a matter of closeness. And an interesting thing is, I don't know if you know the name of Congressman Charlie Wilson, but Tom Hanks did that movie about him, and
yeah,
he was actually one of my best friends on Capitol Hill, and largely socially. I mean, it wasn't like he was I lobbied him or anything. We were just friends, and he actually stayed close to me and wrote to me and helped me while I was in prison.
Oh, good. So you have kept some friends from your time on Capitol Hill?
Oh, yes, I have, and I actually have a friend or two from prison as well. And the two places are not dissimilar. They're kind of a lot alike. And then actually there was a congressman there when I was there. His name was Nick Mavroulis from Massachusetts. And if you follow the newspapers, one or two congressmen go there every year. So
interesting. So you were inspired when you were in prison to come up with this novel idea, and it was because you wanted to read. When you were in there, you decided to read a lot of literature, things that you maybe hadn't read before.
Yes, that's mostly correct. I mean, the idea that I would read sort of came to me fairly quickly, and that I would read challenging literature became far more useful to me because it sort of gave me a perspective and a grounding. And but the actual inspiration came later from my friend Marie Colvin, when I was talking to her about reading and in prison and how it helped me. She said, "There's your novel right there. Write it. Write the damn thing, Gerald." So, but yeah, But books in prison are an interesting thing because they're important. There are a great deal many people who read more than you might imagine, because it's just, the three great scourges of prison are boredom, dissipation, and violence. And so, boredom is a big one, and they, lots of men read, and nobody really owns a book, because you read it, and while you may value it and want to keep it, it could do so much more good by passing it along. And so I remember one time I saw a young Puerto Rican inmate sitting in his cell. He was laughing, and I went and I asked him what he was laughing at, and he's actually reading a copy of Don Quixote that I had given to somebody else months ago.
So what were some of the books that really stuck out in your mind, that you read them and you just thought, wow, this is amazing?
I have this weird sort of bias for great literature and also for British novelists. I read as much as Thomas Hardy and Charles Dickens and Jane Austen and George Eliot and Charlotte and Emily Bronte as I could get a hold of, and of course Shakespeare. And I discovered Montaigne when I was in prison. Very few people read him anymore. And then I read a lot of Chekhov and Ibsen, and you can guess it. Much of it is appears in the novel now. And in ways, in Gospel Prison, my novel, the book is relates the ways in which those various novels helped me understand certain situations. There's a mafia scenario in there that really was like Merchant of Venice.
Wow. And how many books do you think you read?
Oh man, I don't know. Hundreds, I would say.
Really?
Yeah. It's there's this thing where they require us to have prisoners to have work, but there's very little work to be done there. You work in the gym or you work in the landscaping department, and then really the stuff that can be done is finished in half an hour. So there's a lot of sort of wasting of time, spending of time, and many men will spend their time in the weight room or working out, but there's only so much of that they can do, and then that was all very strange, because that's just another atmosphere entirely. I would prefer to be in my cell or in the library than in the weight room, because who knows what might happen there.
Yeah. So you spent a lot of your days reading then?
Yes, I did.
And do you think what you read has changed you as a person? Do you feel like you're a different person now you're out?
Oh, now that I'm out, I'm, I guess one of the things I said when I was in there is that everybody should go to prison for a month or two, and that's sort of, a metaphor. Because what I learned was what my priorities were, and that was I didn't miss the power and influence I had, or the glamorous things that I did, or the trips that I made, or my expense accounts. I just missed my children and my wife. And, I understood the value of self-improvement. And so I thought that's one of the things I came out of prison with, and it was a good lesson for lots of people. The thing that was important to me about reading is that it did give me perspective on myself and enriched my inner life. And the books that I read, I found to be incredibly useful in gaining perspective on the world. So I learned that in prison as well. And I think one of the reasons that my book, Gospel Prism, is set in prison is that prison is sort of a metaphor, whether it's a bad job or bad marriage or closed-mindedness or some other restricted space in which you find yourself. I think if you read challenging literature, you will help yourself to escape that or manage it in a better way.
And you say challenging. Were you ever reading a book that you weren't enjoying or found too challenging, and you thought, no, I'm not going to continue reading this one?
It's funny you should say that, because there are a couple of books like that. One is Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, and the other one is Ulysses by James Joyce. But in the end, I forced myself to read both of those, and I'm glad that I had. And I'm not averse to picking up a beach book too and reading it. I find reading to be a most interesting pastime, no matter what. But I think that in reading Shakespeare or Ibsen or Whitman or Dante, that I'm challenged in a way, and the pleasures are more difficult to obtain. And so that little bit of extra work you have to do, I think, makes it even more valuable.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your protagonist in the book, Christian.
Well, yeah, Christian is visited by a mixed-race Messiah who challenges him to do the learning and understanding of himself through his experiences, which are the sort of things that I learned through reading. And so he immediately becomes an evangelist of this philosophy and goes on a Don Quixote sort of trip, and then has various different adventures, which are all essentially prison vignettes. And he gathers from those literal experiences within prison and related to prison the same sort of lessons and ideas that I gathered from reading those books.
And what kind of people did you write the book for? What kind of people can you imagine reading and enjoying the book?
I hope that it turns out to be as my friend Marie Colvin said, that she said, this book is written in a minor and in a major key, in that if you just pick it up and you can read it as if it were a beach book, because there's some fairly gripping, funny, interesting tales about a place that very few people ever want to visit, but most people will find kind of interesting. But on the other hand, if you're a serious reader and you've done some more reading, then these other books and stories will emerge from this gritty, interesting detective tale, sort of like a palimpsest. You'll get that part too, but you don't need to. You can be, I think, almost anybody and get a kick out of reading how the mafia guys made a deal with their rabbi to sneak contraband into the prison.
And you've mentioned Marie Colvin a few times. I just want to ask you about her, because I know that 20% of all royalties from the book will be going to her memorial fund. Can you just tell us a bit about Marie?
Yes, Marie and I met at Yale at university, and we dated, and then we dated after university, and then we didn't, but we remained friends. over the years, and various important things we exchanged. But in 2010, I visited her in London with my daughter, who studied performing arts and acting and theater at Yale at the time. And Marie had this wonderful way of being very helpful to young women. So I wanted her to meet Marie, and Marie actually got her set up with very many interesting people in Paris, where Harriet was doing summer school. But Marie and I spoke then, and that's when we talked about the books I read and how they helped me through prison. And she said, write the damn novel, Gerald. I'm tired of getting letters and emails from you that are so well written that they should be novels. So then she became like almost everything. She was the muse, the coach, the editor. She said, write and then send me what you got. I remember I sent her the first chapter, and she said, a third of this has to be cut. It's a bunch of throat clearing, and you're smart enough, you'll know what to cut, just do it. So I did, and then, it went like that. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning here and send her an email and tell her what I was up to, and some of the times she'd write back, sometimes she'd call back, and we worked on it that way, and I flew over there with the first 3 chapters, and her intention was to take it to an agent, but then Gaddafi died, and she had to run off to Libya with the 3 chapters in what was a sort of a horrible, dramatic foreshadowing. But she came back and then called me, and I worked the rest of the way through the book, and I finished it on January 25th, 2012. And I sent it to her, and then I started to write my second book, and I'd get up again at 5 in the morning and write her. And for some reason, I don't know why, but on the 22nd of February 2012, instead of sitting down to compose an email to her, I Googled her name, and I have never done that. And I found an 11-minute-old story, I think, in The Guardian or The Times or something, saying that she'd been killed in Syria. And then a month later at her funeral, I went to her funeral in Oyster Bay, Long Island, New York, and afterwards her sister Kat Colvin came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you Gerald Weaver? I have to tell you that when Marie's remains came back from Syria, she had there was a black knapsack with her, and in that knapsack were a satellite phone, changes of underwear, and this big book that had your manuscript in it."
Oh, wow. Amazing. So I'm sure she'll be extremely pleased and proud that the book is now out there.
Well, it's actually sort of bittersweet because she really did sort of make it happen, and I wish she were, I wish I were on the phone to her now. To talk about it. But you're right about one thing, and that is the way she was is that she would have a good laugh at this, and a good smile, and probably knock back a couple of drinks to see that this unfortunate circumstance of her death has made people pay attention to this novel that we basically collaborated on.
Lovely. Well, if people want to get a copy of the book, it's called Gospel Prism. It's out now, and it's by Gerald Weaver, who we've been chatting to today. Gerald, thanks so much for joining us. A real pleasure to chat with you.
And thank you.
Talk Radio Europe.